All right, what's going on, everyone? We have a different kind of show tonight that I'm really excited about. We're going to talk about Todd Weaver, an American who was killed in Afghanistan on September 9th, 2010. I was in the same battalion for a little while as Todd, deployed in the same brigade, but was never fortunate enough to meet him or really know him at all. But I was around a lot of people who did, so could see the impact he had on a lot of folks right away, even to this day. And I think it's every September 9th, a couple of friends of mine that are on here now regularly say something on social media, make a post, something about, we miss you, Todd, something along those lines. And rather than me trying to look back and tell a story about somebody who I wish I knew, but I didn't, we thought it'd be awesome to get some people together that really did know him. So we've got three guys here tonight. I'm going to do my best to step out of this and just kind of facilitate the conversation, but I'll leave it at that for now. Jacob, Kyle, Bryson, thanks for taking the time, guys. I think looking forward to this. And then let's see if we can go ahead and do
a brief. The three of us are here together 10 plus years later, having this conversation, about somebody that we all respected and cared about. And, each of us had a friendship with in a different way. But it is interesting to see, thanks Preston for putting this together, but it is interesting to see Bryson and Kyle here, the three of us, and then having a conversation about Todd is pretty unique. I don't think a whole lot of people get together like that and get a chance to think about the impact that Todd had.
Well, Jacob, you mind leading us off with just a little brief introduction? We'll kind of go around the room here.
Yeah, so I was a platoon leader, Ranger 105 platoon leader for the 101st Airborne, Division 2502. Got there in 2009, early 2009. And Todd and I were in the same company, and then ultimately Kyle and Bryson showed up respectively to the company, Delta Company 2502. So spent my time there at Fort Campbell, went on to be a Ranger instructor after the career course, and did a couple of years company commander at Fort Stewart. Got out after that and live in Gainesville, Florida now.
Kyle, what you got?
Tough to follow that up. But yeah, Kyle Snook, we all came together. It was a platoon leader, 101st, 2502, Delta Company. As Jake mentioned, came in, after Jake and Todd. That's part of the relationship I developed with kind of both of them. It's just being a junior PL and what that relationship means with some of the more senior PLs within your company. Enjoyed my time in the Army, was injured overseas in Afghanistan, which ultimately led me to get out of the military in 2013, when got my MBA, and now do a bunch of different things in healthcare entrepreneurship. So it's exciting to see the group get back together again. Jake's point, it's crazy to see kind of 11 years later, just where everything has kind of landed. And in some regards, it feels like a different life, and in some regards, it feels like yesterday. So thanks for getting the group together, Preston.
Yeah, man.
Happy to talk about it.
Bryson, what you got?
Yeah, so right to Fort Campbell and after Ranger School in about April of 2009. And then Todd and I remember meeting Todd and Jacob and Kyle knew you from my OBC and Ranger School itself. And then I say Todd and I actually took our platoons at the same time. I took over 3rd Platoon, Delta Company. And then we went through and served as an XO while we were deployed. Came back from deployment, went on to Triple C and was the Ranger instructor down at Fort Benning at the same time with Jacob. But Jacob was up in Dahlonega and I was down in 4th RTB down at Fort Benning. And then after that, I took command in Fort Hood. I had one command with a 3rd Brigade 1st Cav, and then had a 2nd command in 3rd Squadron 3rd Cavalry Regiment. And then from there, went to ILE up at Fort Leavenworth. And then I came to the 82nd, started on division staff for about a year. And now I'm serving as a battalion XO in 2nd Brigade 82nd for the past about year and a half now.
Awesome, guys. So if I understand correctly, you all were, that was the 4 PLs, the 3 of you and Todd.
At one time, yeah.
At one time. And were you PL, when you were PLs, did you know the deployment was coming to Afghanistan in 2010?
Yeah, pretty quickly. Pretty
Yeah,
quickly. We knew the rotation was coming up pretty soon. We knew it was, like Afghanistan. Yeah.
I think what happened was, I think we were out on a company
The squad
plane
sticks.
or something like that. Yeah. And I think we were originally slotted for Iraq. And then President Obama at the time had made his kind of speech on the troop surge in Afghanistan. And I think it was November of 29. And I think we gathered up as a company out there in the woods like at 10 o'clock at night. And we're like, we're going to Afghanistan. It's like, all right, cool. I don't know. Memories are tough, right? Looking back, but for some reason, I vaguely remember that.
So you guys
doing squad sticks at the time. So that was during the fall before we started doing all the platoon and company level training. But yeah, so it was a company commander brought us in and said we're changing, we're going to Afghanistan, because we just, all the company leadership just had dinner there on that bench table outside of
Well, that's when Kyle and Bryson found out. The more senior platoon leaders found out way sooner.
Oh, it's fine.
Probably true.
I'm just glad I still have my hair,
Huh? No, I mean, I honestly remember being home. So, something in our timeline's a little bit different there. But, what was interesting was, that time there, that development, the relationships that the 4 of us had. And I mean, I think as you get farther away from the Army, you realize how Army timelines and careers and lives are much more accelerated than other people's lives are. And that's everything from getting married to having kids to, your progression in life, and in most cases, maturity and stuff is a lot different. And I think one thing I always found to be kind of funny is that Todd and I showed up as the new guys, or at least I did, and I must have only been a few weeks, maybe a month ahead of Bryson. And it seemed like overnight, like Todd and I and Bryson were filling positions where people, platoon leaders had already rotated onto the career course. And then suddenly, like I said, overnight, it seemed like, especially Todd and I, got some sort of seniority complex, whether it be from the company commander or just, other people in the unit, where, I was a first lieutenant when I showed up. And I think Todd might have been promoted shortly thereafter to first lieutenant. So, just the responsibilities that the company commander kind of put on us was, I think, a little bit different than maybe what Kyle and Bryson maybe encountered on in those early months. But again, you're talking a few weeks, not much difference at all in our time frame. But I know, Todd and I, very, very close relationship. I think, not to sideline Kyle at all, but, the 2 people that I was closest with was certainly Todd, and then, Bryson. Still have a relationship, to this day. Friendship. I don't want him to take relationship out of context. Friendship. So, Todd and I had a lot of similarities, just things in our background. Seemed like the way we were raised, how we interacted with people, at least from my perspective, seemed very similar. And there was never really a point in time where I felt like Todd and I were at odds with each other. very much felt like it was in the best interest of we both looked out for our teams and tried to work to develop our teams to be the best they could be, our platoons. But it was never, pushing one person out of the way to get to the top or anything like that. Then, as we kind of go on farther throughout this, it's amazing how similar Todd and I's just, time there at Fort Campbell is, the other side of the coin. It's the same. We're doing the same thing throughout. And, and then our family lives too, very, very similar at the time too.
Am I correct that Todd had deployed prior to this?
His prior service.
Yeah, he had gone to Iraq, right?
Yeah, it was Iraq.
Yeah.
It was with a was a National Guard, but he deployed with like second ID. So remember, he had to
Yeah,
do-
I mean, if we want to count that, National Guard. And he was like I can't remember what his MOS was, but it wasn't an infantry guy. Do you recall what it was?
I was going to say it was infantry, but I don't want to speak out of turn there. I don't think it was.
I don't think it was. But I had to go back and check on it.
I
So
think-
was that,
Or go ahead. Yeah, I think one of the interesting points that Jake brought up there that I've thought a lot about over the years is, we used to make fun of Todd for being the old guy in the group.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and yeah, sure, he is older, but like what blows my
40-year-old platoon leader. That's getting up.
yeah, exactly. Right. Like Todd was 26 at the time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think like the mental framing that I've gone back through and think about, to Jake's point, like all the things that are accelerated in the military and kind of you move into things quickly, and, somebody with 2 weeks of experience is light years beyond somebody with none. And just to frame it again is, I just remember part of the relationship was just, looking up to Todd and Jake as being those guys that had kind of been there before and done it and carried themselves kind of in a manner amongst their peers that was this kind of quiet confidence that was, coming into a new unit was incredible to watch that example. But again, just a lot of like what I've thought about after this, just how young all of us were, right, within this experience and how we were still framing who we are. And it's an interesting moment to kind of go through these shaping moments or these high stakes moments when you really, you kind of haven't established who you are in the world yet, what you stand for, what you believe in. But, in our example and in our company and in our unit, and I'd say in our battalion, that's what we got from guys like Jake and especially like Todd. Were just these folks that carried them like they were a little bit older, like they were a little bit more mature. And I think that's what you want to look for within an Army unit, and kind of whenever you do anything anywhere, is just a set of peers that are, setting the example for you that you can look at kind of as like a solid rock. And that's kind of how I always remember kind of the group and the example they set for us, even though, we were still relatively kids,
Yeah, I'd say that, that's very true what Kyle's saying there. And that's something that Todd and I were a little bit more just formed. We were both married. He had a child, before we deployed. I think Kylie was 4 months old when we deployed, 9 months old, 9 months old when we deployed. So they say a little bit more formed, and kind of that comment that Kyle made there, a lot of people at 22, 23, 24 years old, just in society in general, don't really have fully formed opinions on things in general. And I think that when you talk about, quiet confidence, Kyle, I think Todd and I very much did, from our life experiences thus far leading up to that, were very sure in what we were doing and how we were going about doing it. And that, we felt like we were building on, our experiences and making more out of that every opportunity we could to better our teams. But I really did enjoy, working with everybody, Bryson and Kyle. There's a lot of people in those platoons there for that time frame where we were platoon leaders there together. was pretty interesting.
It's funny you talk about people carrying themselves with a little confidence. So you only show up to your first ever Army unit one time. My first ever unit was 2502 as an artillery officer. So 2502 infantry, full of infantry officers. I'm the one of 5 or 6 artillery guys showing up. I had in my mind that all of you were a couple inches taller than me. I'm not necessarily short, but just the way I remember it was and I got there after JRTC, so you guys had all been through it a couple times. And I just have in my mind that everybody was taller than me. I had to look up a little bit, which is how I remember that. But I think that's it, that confidence you're talking about, especially after one of those rotations. You guys, Jacob, you and Todd moved on from Dog Company prior to the deployment, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
And it sucked. Like, when you, and I've thought, I was doing some work today, and just when I was thinking about having this conversation, that is one of the things that I was going to bring up is Todd and I, we somehow, for whatever reason, on seniority or confidence or whatever it was, felt like we got our platoon leader time cut short, and battalion commander Benchoff called us in and said, hey, you guys are going to be taking XO spots with Alpha and Bravo Company, and didn't care for that at all, because we had spent 8-9 months getting our platoons ready, and we knew that we were going to be long in the tooth when we deployed, but I think him and I were confident that, hey, we'll be in these positions, and we'll be able to set our teams up for success. And I think what was most disappointing about it was you felt like you had, not so much gone to the Super Bowl, but you had gotten your team, 10, 11 games into the football season, and they were saying, hey, we need you to be the offensive coordinator instead of, the quarterback. And me and him were both kind of taken aback by that a little bit, because when you're going through ROTC and you're going through your time and training, when you decide that, hey, infantry officer is what I want to do, people always tell you, you're a platoon leader and company commander time. That's the best time you ever have in an Army. And you think to yourself, well, somehow, I want to put my skills to the test at the best possible situation. And to, if I'm good at this job, that can save people's lives. And I know that's how Todd and I viewed it. And so, yeah, it sucked. He felt like we were getting shortchanged on that opportunity. In hindsight, I look at it as a great thing, because, only God knows what's going to happen and where you're going to go throughout your life, and the impact that it has on people. And, putting us into a position where we were able to kind of take those next steps when we were in Afghanistan was something that was, again, very unique, that I don't think you'll really talk to a whole lot of people that have the same type of experience that Todd and I had there, going to Afghanistan and then coming out. So yeah, I kind of thought it sucked, and I guess Bryson was shortly behind us when he got slotted to be the XO, but I did feel a lot better when Bryson got screwed on it too. So that made me feel better.
Thanks, man.
But it felt good. In a way, it felt like our friendship was back in a good place, because the XO community, platoon leaders are oftentimes kind of, I wouldn't say aloof to other platoon leaders, but you're focused on your team and you are competitive in a sense. But then as an XO, you're trying to bring not only those 4 platoon leaders into the fold, but you're trying to make sure your company gets what it needs. But then you've got a different dynamic where you've got some relationships. For me, I had friendships in Delta Company. I had friendships in Alpha Company now. And through that, you had broadened your horizons suddenly on what you could bring to the table for your team. And, I actually really enjoyed being an XO again, looking back at it, it was a good time in those months prior to the deployment and JRTC, although again, still kind of sucked because you're not in the platoon leader role. Having a couple of my buddies looking out for me at different times was something I was fortunate to have.
It's
And
kind
I
of
can, look into the flip side of that as, we trying to think how to say this. We had an interesting command climate in our company for a period of time leading up to JRTC and prior to the deployment. And so, when Jake and Todd got rotated out and kind of our CO and first sergeant changed post JRTC, on the flip side of that is sitting back in the company and like, oh, I don't know if we're allowed to use profanity on this podcast now, but like, oh shit, like our entire talent group, right, is cut out from underneath us, and we lose our first sergeant and our company commander, and we're going to Afghanistan in like 45 days, right? So I remember very acutely the anxiety of just really being afraid that we didn't have the best team that we could have heading into the fight. Now, look, turns out we had incredible company commander and first sergeant that replaced them, really strong platoon leaders that came in behind them. So we were blessed. And then as Jake and Todd and Bryson kind of sat into those XO positions, we were all able to get kind of scale on our abilities to fight and win well in combat. But I remember at the time when that move got made, there was definitely again, being immature and young, sitting back and saying like, we are like this is going to get people hurt. Like we are putting people in a bad situation, specifically Delta Company. It all worked out, but like that was the impact they had kind of in the company, and their departure was felt during that time right before deployment.
It's kind of crazy that 3 PLs from the same company ended up XOs in line companies. That's not.
I stayed with Delta Company, right? But I just got pulled up because right when we got back from JRTC, it was kind of like a Claymore one-off in the company headquarters, and the XO company commander first sergeant all got relieved relatively within a matter of like 2 to 3 weeks, and then so then we took over, I got promoted, quote unquote, to XO position, and then so I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing as a platoon leader. I didn't know what I was doing as an XO. But Kyle and Jake are spot on. It was a lot of turbulence right before, because we got back from JRTC, and then we had about a month in April to kind of set the team and get everything received back from JRTC, repackaged and deployed, shipped out, and then we were on leave, and then we left out. But I know Jake, Todd, and Kyle, they all left a little bit earlier than I did. Yeah, because y'all are part of like the torch flight, left out early. So it was a turbulent couple months. So
Kyle, there's these like random things you remember for no good reason, and we were doing the TBI screening at Fort Campbell, and somebody had asked for volunteers to go advon. I was single. I was just living on a mattress on the floor in like a 2-month lease apartment. So I'll go. Doesn't matter. I'm gonna go some point. And I remember you coming up to me outside the TBI area and saying, "Hey, I really want to go advon." Me thinking like, "Oh yeah." I wasn't upset. It's just funny. Like I somehow remember that exact conversation. Like, "Oh yeah, okay, Kyle's gonna go." But yeah, you guys left what? The main body, Bryson, we left June 7th. So you guys are what, mid-May?
May 21st.
May 21st, yeah. Something around there, yeah.
But the Todd and I worked because being for all the pack out and stuff like that for Advon, the Alpha and Bravo company were right across the hallway from each other, and we had to walk all the way down the hall to Delta Company, so we didn't do that very much. You see, Bryson made him come to us,
Yeah.
But I remember just that pack out being a good time with Todd and that Advon, because we knew that we were going ahead. So we shared a lot of information on how we were tracking stuff and how we were going to be ensuring that we had, the right stuff when we got on the ground, and keeping accountability of our equipment and everything, all the things that XOs do, the behind the scenes work and coordinations And at that point, when we got back from JRTC, Todd and I both felt like the impact that we had made on our respective companies in the XO position during JRTC had been satisfactory, or, got us into a position where we really felt like we were, second in the company and had that relationship with our first sergeants at that point in time, which I know, we see Bryson kind of shaking his head there, that's important, being part of that three-person team there at the top of the company. But again, there's great times there at Fort Campbell and live fire time frame with Todd and JRTC stuff. And then the next phase of that was the Advon going there. So 5-6 weeks ahead of everybody else. I always thought I was shorter than that. And that maybe that's the next flight started coming at the end of
I feel like Delta's coming. Some of the flights might have been coming a lot sooner, but I think I didn't get on the ground until about June 7th, June 8th, or whatever. I think whatever that flight was.
It wasn't that far. It was May 20th to June 7th. So it wasn't a month.
But Jake, to add credence to what you're talking about. So when I came into being like that company XO, one, that was a whirlwind time. Didn't have any systems in place on how to track property or how to account for anything or how to pack out containers. We didn't have, a unit mobility officer in the company. I was the de facto unit mobility officer. The UMO that we had was our previous XO, who was no longer in the position. So back to Todd and Jake, thank you again for everything that y'all provided me during that time. One of the greatest lessons I learned from that experience, and like what I've been able to carry on to now, is always be ready, and always be ready to be like the next man up drills, and always be ready to take that next man up, especially us as company XOs. You're one breath away from taking that command slot, and you don't know how long you're going to be in that command slot. So again, always be ready. But it was an invaluable lesson because I was not ready to be the XO. It took me a few weeks to get my feet on the ground before I could start understand what was going on.
I think if I remember the Avon story right, I think it was like Single Brothers United. Like Bryson had to do like an OC rotation, I think at JRTC some point that year.
4 hours, yep.
Yeah, I think we had made a horse trade like months before that. If anything went down, like I'd take it or whatever because of that. Because honestly, at the time, like all Bryson and I, outside of being a good platoon leader and soldier, but I think all we really cared about was like finding a nice young lady to date, and that was what we spent most of our time thinking about and talking about. So took Adlon to give him his 2 or 3 weeks back from JRTC, which is a massive mistake on our unit's call because I couldn't do anything. Like I was like sitting there with like Todd and Jake, and like they had their whole manifest and their lists, and it's like I didn't even have my manifest, my list. I'm like, can I just like watch you guys and like maybe I'll learn something and tag along? And so Adbon's one of those times I actually look back on like fairly fondly. I mean, we worked a little, we worked out a lot, played a lot of chess, and that's where a lot of the conversations that I had with whether it was Jake or Todd really kind of hit that depth level where I think our relationship evolved kind of during that time period. And but certainly Adbon was like to your point, Jake, I couldn't tell you ballpark how many days we were there before anybody showed up. It was a wild situation for a couple of weeks, just people coming and going and stuff like that. So
we seemingly had a lot to do. And Todd and I think everywhere we went, again, Alpha and Bravo company, we knew we were going to be in the same battle space. We were going to be, right next to each other, no matter what we were doing. We had the same equipment versus, Delta company's representation. So it was different in that sense. And so we just tag team off each other on everything we did. And it was funny. I remember somehow we were able to commandeer this little hoopty truck. You remember that little thing? It was, I remember Todd, we I don't know how we got it, but I don't know. It's one of these kind of funny things that you look back on and remember is we're at Kandahar airfield and nobody's got any way of getting things done. And it's like, I'll kind of use this another time later. It's kind of like a movie type of feeling because you're walking around this dusty moonscape going, oh, this is kind of interesting, but you know, you're soaking in all the sights and smells and sounds and trying to do something, whether it's working out or listening to some music or playing some chess, that kind of keeps things on a normal routine, but you're always waiting on somebody else. And so, you know, Todd and I, you just got that comfort level where you know, you're going somewhere with your buddy and you're talking about, you know, wife and kids and family type stuff, and that, you know, football and all type, you know, things like that. But I remember we got this little flatbed truck. Well, I'll have to find a picture of it somewhere or find something on the internet, but it's a classic little Afghan piece of junk. And we got it from somebody, got access to it. Except, you know, I drove a stick, but I remember Todd getting into it and he was like, I don't know, man. He goes, the driver's seat is on the wrong side. It's on the left side. You had to shift with your left hand. And so that was pretty funny. But it was a two-seater. And so the only time Kyle could come with us, he had to sit in the middle.
That's right.
That period when you guys were at Advon, did you know what we were getting into, that deployment? Or was it a little too hectic?
I think we had
Too hectic. I think the reality of the situation was pretty well understood, that we were going into clear an area that people hadn't been setting foot in for quite a while. So it wasn't like we were falling in on somebody's battle space that they had been securing for a while. Now, in parts of where we're at, there was the 82nd. So we knew we were taking a battalion where a company had been. We were taking a brigade to where a battalion had covered. So we knew we were going to have a significantly larger footprint in impact. Now, as far as the, you know, the contact reports that were coming in while we were there, in hindsight, when I look back on it now, I remember Todd and I talking about it, and we go, well, I don't know where any of these places are really, and we're not 100% sure where we're going to be really. We have like you point to a place on a map with your finger, and this area with a general hand wave doesn't really mean a whole lot, and you can't put a whole lot of context to it. And we didn't have anybody from the 82nd there talking to us saying, hey, you know, these are the main highways, these are the routes, this is where you're going to be, this is where we've got outposts set up, this is where we're having, nobody was sitting down there having those briefings with us. And I think that was a very poor, I guess it all happened when we got out to Housi Madad, but it wasn't happening back at Kandahar, that's for sure. And there was also some things where Todd and I were, when we did hear some contact reports things, we were kind of scratching our head thinking, that's not really how I would go about doing things, you know, not to be too critical of past experiences, but as you know, a unit in their last month there, they're winding things down. So they were within their last, 4 to 6 weeks of being there. So, that's that. Kyle, anything else?
No, I mean, I think just a general theme rate that I think we've all gone through, being deployed is just impossible to get information, especially when your unit's not established there yet, right? And so that creates this anxiety of kind of what's coming and what's going on. But again, I think that's what drives and fosters a lot of those deeper relationships, right? Because we're all going through that shared experience trying to figure it out. But when I look back, I think like intuitively we understood that like if we announced we were going to do a troop surge, the enemy's not dumb. There's likely going to be a strategy of putting a lot of IEDs out. Where they put them, where we were going, whether that would affect our lives, no idea. But generally had heard that Afghanistan was just a heavy kind of IED situation at that time. But outside of that, it was just.
Yeah, and I remember being pretty pissed about that because Obama told everybody where we were going in November. And so we were if there was a level of discomfort, it was that the enemy has known we're coming here, and here it is June. They've had 8 months to get ready for us, and somebody gave them a hand wave on a map and said, hey, yeah, we're going to go to Kandahar and, secure Helmand and Zari, So I didn't really care for that. And so there, they said, if there was a sense of discomfort, it was because of that.
By the time we kicked out to Housing Madad, Kyle, you were the only platoon leader in the group, right? Everybody else is XOs now for a short period of time.
That's right. Yeah, I guess that's right. I honestly, I don't really remember. A lot of it's a blur, but that sounds right.
When we were at Housing, was there enough overlap there, Jacob, between you, Bryson, Kyle, and Todd? Were you guys interacting there much?
Yeah, it was before we made our concerted push south, because before you guys got picked up and go to the FA battalion. We had about a month and a half there, right? Because I forget exactly when y'all went. I have some notes, but I forgot exactly when you guys went. But
Well, we would have gone early August is when we went over to 320.
you guys were gone about a month before it happened. So yeah. That's all
Getting
right.
on the ground mid-June, and it was Todd and I were still there because we were first in Kandahar, and then we were on the last to leave Kandahar too.
Yeah, because I was on Kandahar for about
We had to get the pack out with all the equipment and send everything forward, and the platoon started rotating in, so we had to cycle all that through. So it was, June 21st or so by the time we got to Housing Madad, maybe a week or so after that. And so, yeah, Preston, you're right, about 5 or 6 weeks where there was probably some overlap. And then, I went out to our company forward operating base, and then so did Todd. So you had some things where each of us were starting to get kind of acclimated to our battle space and what our functionality was going to be, in the unit as well. And then Delta Company was staying at Housing, right?
we stayed at Housing until we made that push south. Yeah.
So, there was overlap, I think, there with all of us, but I remember there being a little bit more overlap probably in kind of conversation time with Bryson once we got to Housing than at Kandahar.
Yeah, once we got to Housing, I was just knee deep in the company and the platoon and all of that. And, I think probably ran into like Jake and Todd when we were trying to stand up these makeshift gyms for like a month so that it's hard to, like, we were working out like 2.5 hours a day, 7 days a week at that time, obsessed with it. And, I think that's the only time we ran into him on the back end of that. And then I think I saw him maybe the day before, the day of when y'all were loading out and heading up to the Arghandab.
Let's talk about that there, because I don't even know all the details, but the 1st Battalion 320 Field Artillery was the field artillery unit for the 2nd Brigade Combat Team. They were up in the Arghandab River, which was northeast of Zari. And they'd been, I don't know. Jacob, why don't you take it away? Maybe some background on what was happening there.
So the background, again, is that we were getting, contact reports at the Cubs, right? And our companies were forward. Alpha and Bravo company were already forward predominantly. And so, us and Todd and I and the first sergeant would be taking these Cubs in person with the battalion commander, and they would be sending up contact reports on what was happening in the area. And the part of this is a little bit, hindsight, but 320th, the FA guys started taking heavy contact and significant casualties. So there was, for the brigade, it was the first real contact that the brigade was facing. And we really felt like we were setting the conditions for us to move into our battle space for 2nd Battalion. And Colonel Benshoff was holding ground and just kind of making sure that, we had all of our conditions set the way we wanted them to be before we made our significant move and push. And I'm sure he's deconflicting a lot of assets with the brigade. But there was this contact that was happening, it seemed like, on a daily basis. Somebody getting killed, somebody getting wounded, contact reports about IEDs, contact reports about snipers, it was at that point when it started, that stuff started coming in, and we were hearing that and sharing that with our teams. It was real, as real as it gets, because you're more or less in the thick of it. And although you may not know those guys, you're questioning the reports and analyzing the reports to see what information you can glean from it and give to your company commander, give to your platoon leaders, and say, hey guys, this is what is current. This is what they're doing. This is what you guys need to look out for too. As that was going on, a couple of 3-4 weeks kind of into that, then they, before I kind of jump into that, because I'll probably dominate a good portion of that conversation when the decision gets made to pull Todd and I. So I don't know if Bryson or Kyle has anything else to say up until that point. I remember I gave Bryson a haircut, and I thought it was really good.
It was not good.
And nobody liked it. It was really bad.
Thrown back though. Thanks, man. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Taking some time.
I remember those contact reports coming in. We try to map them a little bit in the CP. I don't know if Bryce and Kyle, you remember, but if I'm not mistaken, I think the 82nd lost a guy on a handoff patrol. Like that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. Okay. So there was no stoppage.
Which ended up being the platoon that I went to.
That's crazy. I mean, those are for anybody listening. A lot of times those handoff patrols usually aren't in the most contested areas. Kind of training wheels type things. But I think that speaks to how nasty the Arghandab was at the time.
Well, the other thing too, the thing was.
Go ahead, Bryson.
Well, which was more, to add credit to the 320th is that, FA battalions are not generally landowners. And it's just, they got put into an area that was much more contested, I guess, than, obviously not near the level where the decision was being made, but looking back, I just remember that area being so heavily contested up front when we first got there. That's where all the contact was happening. Because as far as what we were receiving there at Arghandab was, it was like every morning at 7 a.m. A&A patrol would go out and they would make contact near Spin Pier off to our east at the time. But outside of that, as far as we were not receiving a whole lot of contact other than a few, indirect rounds from mortar systems that were just to our south. But there, because we were not doing a whole lot of patrolling. Some of the companies down south were doing patrols in and around area, but we were holding up until the decision was made to do Operation Dragon Strike into September. That's when we started our fighting, when we were going on the tail end of the fighting season. But yeah, as far as at that time, contact reports, everything we were reading about was coming from where 320th was.
Yeah,
to put some context into it, the Arghandab River Valley. So you've got a river, and then you've got Highway 1, which I guess is south of the river, or at least the way my brain kind of thinks of it right now. And so you have this space in between Highway 1 and the river that is contested by the Taliban, our now allies, right? And so Highway 1, we are then farther south. Arghandab's on the south side of Highway 1. So that's, if you kind of imagine that, if you're somebody listening to this. So you have, you have your combat outposts and your FOBs and, your major bases on the south of Highway 1. And then as soon as you cross Highway 1, you're into area where you have, the chance of significant contact until you push down to the river. Once you get to the river or the river valley itself, where it opens up, then on the other side would be somebody else's area or battle space. Now, up in the Arghandab area where 320th is at, the distance between Highway 1 and the river is pretty close. It's like, I don't know, Bryson, I don't have a map in front of me. It might be 10 kilometers. But where Arghandab is at, it is, I don't know, I'd say 30. So you have this wide kind of like, not bell shape, but it's kind of narrow at the, I would say, on the west side, and then real wide on the east side. 320th on the west, and 1502, 1502, and then 2502 are more to the east. So what I thought was really interesting getting on the ground eventually in Arghandab is the terrain is much, much different than what I expected. And so it's like desert to your back to the south of Highway 1, and then it gets more kind of mud brick and rural, and you have housing structure, but it's still pretty wide open. Whereas in the Arghandab, it's actually pretty thick and dense vegetation in some areas.
To back it up just a little bit, because I want to talk about how you ended up there in a totally different battle space, but to add a little context, I think it's easy to look at this and we all remember the 320th getting hit every day and taking casualties. And Bryson just brushed right by the fact that people like Kyle's platoon were in contact every day. Small arms contact. I think Kyle was dodging RPGs about this time, if I'm not mistaken.
I was doing a truck tow. That's a little bit of a hard one to tell a war story on towing a truck out of a hole, but yeah, RPG was close. So
And I'm not saying contact wasn't happening. I'm just saying that I think the reports coming in were so much more significant coming from the 320th SAO.
100%.
Yeah, and you got to remember.
I just remember when the RPG went off near Kyle, me and Todd said he probably wasn't paying attention.
Well,
He
was hopped up on Jack 3D is probably what it was.
I probably was
just
on
trying
Jack
to get back
3D.
to those 2.5 hour workouts instead of
There you
getting
go.
manifest straight.
In my defense, I probably was on Jack 3D, and Lieutenant Colonel Benshoff was standing next to me. So,
I remember that video.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So
Yeah,
I mean,
that actually is an interesting video, that we saw. Just giving some context to the realism of it all. This is no joke. Your battalion commander is, getting involved out there with a platoon, that's in enemy territory, and these guys shoot at RPG, within feet of your battalion commander and dropped him to his knees.
Yeah.
So again, very real that you could be out of a battalion commander, pretty darn quick, to what Bryson said, and next man up, you better be ready to go.
yeah, the tone and tenor was certainly, they were being bold at the time. I mean, I think the other piece of context that always comes back to mind too was in the middle of July there, just south of Arghandab on like the western half of Kandahar. I mean, they did a complex VBID borne attack on a 82nd base and overran the base. It's not talked about that often, but yeah, I mean, that's where we were in the summer of 2010, was just around that area, with shooting RPGs at random different vehicles. The Arghandab's get hit every day. Western Kandahar, they're literally slamming VBIDs into walls and throwing people through. So it certainly was a time that, I'd never been deployed for. I have no context, right? But it felt real, and it felt like they were certainly being bold at that point in time, for sure.
So Jacob, you and Todd end
You go
up.
back and look at it. In 2010 and 11 were the two deadliest years in Afghanistan. So when you're putting some context to that, that's what you were dealing with, and the majority of that was in Helmand and in Kandahar at that time.
And you guys ended up in Arghandab with the 320th. What was that?
Yeah.
process
So
like?
what happened was, some of these contact reports were going on, and suddenly somebody called us. Todd and I were at Housing Madad, and we just got told, hey, Colonel Benshoff wants to see you right now. And I don't think he was actually there. We got called up, and the brigade, or the battalion XO, just had us on speakerphone with Colonel Benshoff, and Benshoff said, hey, I'm losing you guys. He said, you guys have been selected by Colonel Kandarian to go to 1st to 320th. They're having a hard time up there. They need some infantry expertise, and you guys are the best suited to go. He said, I don't really have all the details, He goes, you're going to be leaving as soon as you can get all your gear together and what you need, but be ready to go be part of a platoon, be part of a company. They didn't actually even specify what we were going to be doing. We kind of assumed it was some sort of role, but we didn't know if it was a company role, a platoon role, a advisory role. We didn't know. And so, that was unexpected, kind of to say the least. And I remember Todd and I walked out of there and there wasn't a whole lot of, woe is me, we got to leave our company. We were ready to go and we knew, this is what we had trained for. And let's see where it takes us and what we have to do next. So I know there's kind of some quick goodbyes, around the way. And before we know it, we were packing our gear and, a bunch of my buddies, Larkin O'Hearn, Corey Castle, Sergeant Beisel, just gone. And so we didn't really get to say goodbye to many of the people in the company either, let alone the battalion. And I want to say it was either, I think it was first thing the next morning, we were getting on a helicopter from Halsey and going to I think it was Cop Tynes. No, it wasn't Tynes. I can't remember off the top of my head where 320th Battalion was, but regardless, we hopped on a plane and we went to 320th Battalion headquarters. And two, we also didn't have like any point of contact. It was, you're going to go to 320th and go over there and they're going to take care of you when you get there. They need some help. That's like the extent of the conversation. So any questions we had, like, well, are there other platoon leaders from other places coming over there? Are there other, infantry guys? I had no idea that, what 1st to 320th makeup was in their companies or their platoons or any of that. So it was, unique and very interesting.
So did you know you were going to be a platoon leader when you got there, or was it? I mean, it kind of sounds like you could be an advisor almost. Yeah,
it I don't think they really knew. I think what was happening was Colonel Flynn, the battalion commander for 320, said either him or Colonel Kandahar have a conversation. They said, hey, we need some help. They jointly made a decision and said, hey, we're going to get some infantry guys over there, to get on the ground. And Colonel Flynn, you make the decision to put them where you need them the most, is the gist of the conversation. And so I'm sure that when they were having a conversation, when they told Benchoff, hey, Jacob and Todd are going, I'm sure there wasn't, probably the decision hadn't really been finalized. And I'm sure Colonel Flynn was thinking it over, on what he was going to do with us until he saw what kind of people he was going to get. And, you get some first impression. You only get to make first impressions once. Like Kyle said, you only get to be a platoon leader once. And for Todd and I, you actually second chance, but you only get to make that first impression once. And so, like I said, we loaded up on some choppers and landed and reported to 320th headquarters, which is where Colonel Flynn was. And remember, they were getting back from patrol pretty much when Todd and I got there. And it was just kind of, again, a little bit kind of like being in a movie setting. You've just got you got a duffel bag and you got your kit and you got your gear, and that's all you got for, 12 months in Afghanistan. That's your stuff, and, maybe a tough box of some stuff that I'd stolen from Bryson. And Colonel Flynn said, hey, guys, come into our, this is our talk here and this is what we've got. And introduced us to a few people, S3, and just other people in the patrols. First sergeant, sergeant first classes, just people that were around. And he took us over to a map, and he laid out some stuff on the map and said, "Hey, this is where we're at right now." He said, "We've been taking heavy contact. We've got our Bravo company, we've got Charlie company, and this is the general gist of the situation, which is, again, we're getting beat up pretty heavily, and I want you guys to take 2 platoons, 1 platoon in each company, and I want you guys to go there and not only be platoon leaders, but I want you guys to lend your expertise, your Ranger qualified, your infantry, your XO expertise to those companies, and make them a fighting force." And that was pretty much the gist of the conversation. And we nodded and said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Both of you guys, we're going to go down to where they had lost a guy, which ultimately became a road intersection. They made it the headquarters for Todd's company, but it was Cop Stout." And so Stout was one of their sergeants. I think it was E5 sergeants who had gotten killed a few days beforehand. So they had pretty much already said, "Hey, this is some ground we're going to hold, and we're going to name it Stout." So they already were referring to it as Stout when we got there. I think it was Charlie company. It might have been, I don't recall off the top of my head what company it was that Kyle went to. Do either of you guys know just off the top of your head?
Was it Havoc?
Yeah. Okay. So it was Havoc. It was their headquarters company, which, again, you talk about a group of guys just kind of thrown together. The platoon sergeant was weatherman background. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. So I said, "Hey, Todd, let's get down there." He goes, "I want you to link up with Havoc. They're down there right now. And Jacob, you're going to go down there and you're going to stay with them for a few days until Todd and his platoon get refitted and come back." So Todd and I both went down there, and we take this walk, and this is where we were starting to get a feel for how different the terrain was. And they had secured, you could see their battalion fob from where Stout was out. So it's maybe 2 kilometer walk to get down to Stout. And there's, the Great Rows, to your left and right. And we got down to Stout and started taking contact immediately upon getting there. And that was my first look at Captain Schaefer, who's a guy who I had a lot of respect for just in my brief interactions with him. He seemed to be a very capable commander who had the respect of his guys. And I felt like Todd was going to be in a good position with Captain Schaefer, and that they were going to have, they were going to be able to do some good things, training up those guys. And so we got down there, and I remember Schaefer, they were taking contact from a little compound, 100 yards away or so. And, Apaches come right in overhead, and they call in some Hellfire strikes 100 yards away. Again, when you're sitting there as a 24-year-old platoon leader, you're getting shot at, and you're suddenly more real by the minute, and also sitting there going, all right, well, everybody is got their wits about them, so let's do what we need to do. So I remember that was really, no, I guess when they came down, that was the last time I saw Todd. So they kind of wrapped things up the rest of the afternoon, and it's weird, You take a guy who's never me, you take a guy who's never been in the unit before, doesn't know anybody, doesn't know any of their SOPs, doesn't know any of their markings, doesn't even have a command signal card, doesn't have a platoon leader, doesn't have a specialist with him to say, hey, this is Kyle, this is Bryson, this is, so-and-so. And you're just down there with 50% Afghan A&A guys and a smattering of people from a different unit, from their headquarters unit. And so Todd left, and he got a few days to get his guys situated before they came back down.
That would have been probably mid-August, roughly.
That was beginning of us. That was like within 48 hours of us. By the time we were down there at Stout, it was probably within 36 hours of even being told that we were going to be going over there. So, I mean, all that conversation was like a day and a half, maybe two. And so I want to say it was probably the first week of August, second week of August. It was pretty early in August. I don't recall it being, again, the dates off the top of my head. Yeah. You might be right there, the 10th or something like that, the 9th or 10th, something along those lines.
I'm just going off how it sounds. Yeah, I'm not looking up anything.
Yeah.
Honestly, one interesting point there, which again goes just back to the maturity level and the quiet confidence. Like, I don't know how you'll play out the podcast, but if you listen to Jake tell the story, like, and it sounds like you just like very matter of fact kept going. They told us what we were going to do this. We packed our stuff. We went, like, that really is how Todd and Jake act. I mean, there is no drama. There is no, well, how am I going to get word back to my wife, or like, how am I going to pack my things, or what about this? What about that? I mean, that is part of the reason why, like, some of the impacts of what eventually happened have at least stuck with me for so long, is because, aspirationally, like, that's the kind of soldier, the kind of leader, the kind of human you want to be. Certainly not who I was at that time, nor probably who I am now. But, that tone and tenor that Jake takes there telling the story is truly how I remember kind of Todd and Jake experiencing that moment. And it's, if you think about the whole buildup that we talked about before, and the situation that was going on, and kind of the intensity of that area, coupled with how they handled that transition, is, I mean, that's what it's all about right there.
It's crazy. Yeah. No time to think, I guess, right? You got to go.
Yeah. You're thinking about what you're doing there in that moment, and, the tasks associated with that. So Todd, like I said, he left and get his platoon ready, which again, with these platoons, they're not 32, 35, 36 guys. They're like 18, 17. They're Delta size platoons, but with 2 squads of 9 artillerymen each. It's pretty mild. So I stayed there, like I said, for a couple of days. There was contact every day, but there was not anything significant. Small arms fire, a couple RPGs hit. So I got to experience there a little bit what Kyle got to experience. RPG did hit about 10 feet from where I was at, where they were trying to shoot at one of our MATVs who was set up in a overwatch position. And like I said, smaller fire, but it was interesting. I kind of got a lay of the land where where those basic principles that we had learned at the Ranger School, at IOBC, at your squad sticks, putting those things into practice, like sectors of fire, your pace plan, checking on your guys, making sure people were awake. That's all I did for a couple of 3 days, is just kind of walk the perimeter and make sure that people were actually, especially the Afghan guys, were awake. I tell you, that was an unnerving feeling. I don't know those guys, you know, I had no relationship with them. And again, more or less by myself, you didn't know anybody, you know, your comfort level of like going to sleep was, you know, not the greatest in the world. You know, are these guys going to stay awake? Are they going to shoot one of us in our sleeping bag? I don't know. So that was probably the most unnervy portion of being down there for a few days kind of by yourself. But, you know, it was pretty cool. You know, within 24 hours or so, they got some dozers in and they started filling HESCO barriers. And before I know it, Todd came back. And I actually think that I did see him one more time after that at 320th space, because I distinctly remember there being a very satisfying interaction with him like a couple of weeks later where we got to share some information and say, hey, you know, how's it going? What are you doing? You know, it's not like I just call you up on the radio and just gab for a little while. So he came down and I remember him, you know, just having his gear and being focused on the task at hand when they swapped out with us at Stout. And I don't remember there being a whole lot of conversation other than, Todd, this is what I've been doing for a few days. This is what I know, but it wasn't much. But I very, very distinctly remember, you know, there's some things in my mind's eye just seeing him. And it's funny too. I remember Schaefer was had like a, you know, he had the Kyle Snook beard first time I met him, and then the next time I met him, he was clean shaven in the Bryson Shipman, you know,
Right. Or yeah, the one
commanding officer function, you know.
Now, if we move to September 9th, was this any part of an operation? Was it just a standard everyday patrol? Do you know much about that, Jacob?
Everyday patrol.
Gotcha.
He was doing what I was trying to do, which was, and I will speak from my experience on this because, like I said, there was an interaction that I had with him at the company base. And again, the actions that we were doing were one and the same. We were training those guys, you know, on the job training. And unlike anything you would ever plan for, is you're training for a live fire exercise in a live fire exercise with a bunch of people that have not really done it the right way. And to no fault of their own, they just weren't really in that position. So, you know, I was in a platoon, but there was 3 other platoons with platoon leaders and platoon sergeants and squad leaders and such. So it was my job, it was Todd's job to advise those company commanders on what we thought was the best course of action for operations that we were doing over that roughly month time frame. And I'm, again, speaking from personal experience, there was a few things where we were able to get some good ideas through. Strangely enough, my company commander was replaced shortly after I had been there, maybe 2 weeks. So before, I think before Todd got killed. So again, strange, weird stuff going on, you know, in the heat of battle, where the leadership, you know, we're talking about leadership taking accountability in the last couple of weeks on the big stage, and people not taking accountability when they should. Well, on the ground, you know, Colonel Kandahar and Colonel Benshoff and Colonel Flynn, they were holding people accountable, you know, and saying, hey, we're going to get some leaders in here that know what they're doing, because, you know, people are getting killed. So the impact that Todd and I were having, again, was also in an advisory role, in a mentorship role, but very much in a training role. And we were taking the Ranger School principles and applying them to our platoons on a daily basis. So everything from walking through how to set up an ambush, and, you know, choke points and left and right security, and checks before you go out the wire, making sure everybody's got batteries, and teaching squad leaders and platoon leaders to do those things, because they understand the concept, but the actual application was lacking, and the consistency was lacking. And that was the conversation that Todd and I had. Is he was saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. I said, yeah, I'm doing the same thing. And I'd say, this is what I'm doing. He goes, yes, I'm doing the same thing. And it was just on a daily basis, walking our guys through, how do you patrol, the basics of patrolling. And in addition to that, incorporating, 4 to 6 to 8 ANA guys, Afghan National Army guys in that formation that you have very limited capability to communicate with across the board. And as well, refining and learning some new techniques on the ground that might be effective, and identifying shortcomings in equipment. So an infantry unit has, at the end of the day, has a lot of equipment at their disposal. They know what they have, and they can bring a lot of things to bear pretty quickly. When you're when you're artillery platoon, there's some things that you just don't have. Like, I distinctly remember telling Colonel Flynn, and said, hey, we need 2 saws, and we need 2 240s for the platoon, one per squad. We have to have that, because we don't have the firepower that we need in case we get into contact. And I remember him, again, a funny thing, Bryson, you guys as XOs, I remember Colonel Flynn coming in at our patrol base, or our cop, and handing me a 240. And I remember looking at him going, one, yeah, this is what I asked for, but like, do you want me to sign for this thing? There's got to be some sort of chain of custody,
There will be a flip.
And it was the same thing. There was suddenly like I woke up, after saying, hey, we need this stuff. And like, a couple of days later, we had, 3 320s or 4 320s. And we had, a couple of 240s in the platoon, like still greased up and brand new. So that was kind of cool, but also kind of funny. Like, okay, like, thanks. I mean, I still need all the other gear that goes with this. You know what I mean? I know there's more stuff that comes with this. It's not just where's the other barrel, for example.
Nah, don't worry about that.
Yeah, don't worry about that. So they said that was the last conversation that I remember in my mind having with Todd. And I remember him being very happy. And that's all I can say, on that is, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be? You're doing what you wanted to do with your guys.
Yeah. Especially after being pulled away as platoon leaders, right? I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, I wish I had less time as a platoon leader. He found his way back to do it again.
I feel like I think Todd and I had exchanged an email that August. I think his phrase was like, I feel like I'm like actually doing the platoon leader job. There were times when we were in Delta Code, just it's different type of platoon, different type of unit, different type of things going on. And I think when he was in that situation, leading that team, he felt that, this is exactly what we trained for. This is actually more in line with what I thought the job would be. And I think he said, like, there was a lot of learning, was the word I'll use, for the platoon that they needed to go through since he had gotten there. But that he loved doing that. And that was like part of what he was enjoying the most about being with that unit. And so even through virtual change, kind of experiencing the same thing that Jake was talking about there.
And they were a little bit more into it as far as daily contact than my platoon was. So my company was like on the western fringe of the Arghandab, and his company was, I guess you'd say, is more north towards the river. So in between us. So we did border this, our companies shared, not shared, but we boarded each other on that battle space of things. But I remember there for a couple of weeks. It seemed like I got more time with my guys to kind of set the stage where I could take them on some patrols to the south. I could take them on some patrols out to the west, where I felt like we're not going to step on an IED out here because we can see it. When we were setting up some ambushes, it was on the outside of the towns where I felt like our infill and exfil routes were things where we could visually, we could see them and monitor them. Again, make sure that somebody wasn't setting up an ambush or an IED on us. But the things that I was doing was, sending out a lot of night patrols and setting up, ambushes for 4 or 6 hours and then coming back in after daybreak, or so that they would see that we were out there, but they didn't see us when we went out. So that was kind of my thing that I was trying to accomplish with our guys. And it was putting us in a position to be able to respond and just get the basics down on how we're going to maneuver, how we're going to communicate, and how we're going to fight. And again, I know Todd was doing the same thing, but his was a little bit, anytime they went north or west, they were not as protected, and they were, as far as a oversight position, you just couldn't see it as well. Because one of the things that I remember saying to Todd specifically, I said, no, this is not like what you think of in Afghanistan. South of the road, it very much, south of Highway 1 or south of the road, it very much is, mud brick buildings and open desert. But north, it's very thick vegetation, grape rows and trees and poppy fields and marijuana plants, that are 8 feet tall. And so it was a lot different. And I remember telling people that it seems much more like you're in some, kind of dried out Vietnam area, not Afghanistan, not like that at all. And actually quite pleasant in the sense that it was greener. There was a couple of canals and stuff like that, but the throughways, the foot traffic was very congested. And so there was a lot of likely avenues of approach where you could put an IED.
And maybe to echo that, or sorry, go ahead, Jake.
That was the most difficult aspect of kind of what we were trying to overcome.
And to echo that, I remember when Bryson and I went up there for the memorial ceremony for Todd, we drove up because the air was black. We can tell that story later if we want to or not. But I remember when we got to Arghandab being extremely nervous and like borderline scared all the time, because the AO switched so much, to Jake's point. Like when we were on the highway down in Zari and on Highway 1, like there's so much space in between us and the population, us and kind of the restricted line of sight from where the waterways were and things of that nature. And we're going through towns with people everywhere, and the river is almost touching the road. And I just remember riding through being like, we are in a very, I actually might have called Bryson on the radio. I was like, we are in a very, very different world at this point. You can feel it as soon as you enter that valley, that it completely changes. The terrain's totally different.
You can see it on a map too. It gets a lot greener up there. Just being close to the river, it gives you some perspective as to what water does to an area and the rest of that dust bowl. So I don't know, the next comment I have is, unless anybody else wants to jump in, is the day Todd died. Try to struggle through that nonsense if you want.
We don't need to, whatever you guys are comfortable with there. We don't have to get into details. We can leave it like this, whatever you guys want to do.
Well, I think getting to the memorial is I'd like to hear what Bryson and Kyle have to say, certainly at some point, but getting to the memorial was nice. Nice time to get together.
Yeah.
Well,
Right,
the sucky part about the sucky part about people getting killed in Afghanistan is in other units is you're aware when anybody takes contact, and you're aware anytime somebody gets injured or gets killed. And that's kind of what happened. That's exactly what happened. I was at our company outpost, and I went and did just kind of a morning check and said, hey, do we take any contact with anything? And again, I'm still pretty new. There's people that I'm trying to meet and know, because I'm rotating back to the company outpost where my platoon's at, and there's new faces all the time. So they're like, I don't know who's this guy, some lieutenant's coming in here asking me, what's going on. And I remember the guys that were in there were familiar to me. I don't know their names off the top of my head. But I remember they were familiar with me, and they said, Havoc had like 3 casualties, the last hour or so. And I remember looking at the board, and they had written down, the initials in the last 4, which was TW. And I just asked, KIA, wounded, and they didn't know. But they said, I think there was 3 guys and maybe 1 Afghan guy. Is that right? Do you guys recall that just off the top of your head?
I just remember, so the initial report, I can look back through some of my notes, but the kind of similar way I found out, Jake, is that morning I woke, because the previous night I went with a resupply mission to Spin Pier with 1st Platoon. And then that morning I went out with 3rd Platoon, my old platoon, to just a mission, just a, lack for a better term, a presence patrol, but we're just conducting a patrol up north to the village I was north of Housey.
You might have to edit that out, by the way, Preston. Since Bryson's still in the Army. We'll be on the record saying presence patrol, bro.
Yeah, no, that's not a thing. But yeah, so we did go north into just north of Housey. And then I came back in, and it was Preston, you're the actual one that I talked to first, but we didn't. It was kind of the same thing. It came over Merc chat where, hey, there's a triple amputee. Here's the battle roster number. It was very limited details, and it didn't click in for me at all. Then I continued on with my day. Then I'm Captain Tim Price, now Lieutenant Colonel Tim Price. He's the one that he pulled me and First Sergeant Allen in, and he explained what happened. And that's how I found out. But outside of who else was injured, I remember seeing the storyboard on it, but I don't recall. I do not believe it was, at least from that initial explosion from the ID. I don't recall anybody else getting. Man, I know other people got hurt, but I think Todd was the only KIA at that time. I think it was another.
Then that's probably is the case. But I think there was other people that were that they had evac with them because they were in close proximity.
Right.
It was either that or whatever. But I think you did hit it on the head. It was reported as multiple amputee, triple amputee, double amputee, and with the battle roster number. So yeah, Bryson, you hit that on the head, and that was where my, dare I say, hope or hesitation in my mind was, well, maybe he's okay.
Yeah. For
a little while. But in another sense though, I wanted to understand the context of the situation, because it's something I took with me as an instructor, and something that I continue to, reference to this day, is Todd was a very, very good soldier. And I know he did things right, and I know he didn't cut corners on things. And one of the things I told the students, I said, look, I told my brother, families, as I said, hey, you can be a great soldier, or you can be a bad soldier and you can get killed, or you can survive. You can be a great soldier and you can get killed, or you can survive. The reality of the situation is, it doesn't matter how good you are, sometimes things just don't work out in that sense. And that's just combat. That's how it goes sometimes. And what we can do, what infantry officers, infantry soldiers, anybody that's in combat can do, is just put yourself in enough good situations as many times as possible, where maybe you learn from the bad situations. Maybe you learn from, the mistakes of other people or whatever it might be. And a good portion of it is just luck. And all of that has a flip side to the coin too. You can be in a pretty mild, moderate situation. You stick your head up at the wrong time and that gets you too. So that's always been something that is a much more, I think that when we're 22, 23 years old, kind of up until that point, I had probably been a little bit more judgmental of people, not to be rude, but just, kind of getting killed in combat. Well, hey, kind of what did they do wrong? And when storyboarding this and when going through it with Captain Schaefer, when talking to Colonel Flynn about it, there wasn't corners cut in what they were trying to do, and I really don't know how there ended up being an IED there. Much more than anything else, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's how I found out. It was a crummy day there for a little while. And I remember, I think I took my guys on patrol at like 10 o'clock. So there wasn't a whole lot of time to waste. I know please edit that out. It was not waste. There wasn't a whole lot of time to think too much about it. I think until the afternoon, like the next day or maybe thereafter. I mean, how they do. They everything goes dark, and when they have a KIA in the unit. I had, my wife's looking at me now, but I felt bad for what they were going to have to deal with and go through.
It's crazy to think about, and I don't think it's something anybody can ever prepare for, the idea of getting that news, and then an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours later, you gotta have your head in the game 100%. I don't know that that's something you can ever be ready for. But I remember hearing the news kind of flow across the company. Kyle, I think you told me, but it spread pretty quickly through Dog Company. I think you could see the impact it had on our soldiers when they found out that it was Todd.
Yeah, I think I found out very similar to Shipman. Just came off of like a night patrol, heard a triple amputee Merc chat, went to bed. Somebody woke me up and told me a couple hours later. And I ran to the talk, ran to Shipman, gave him a hug, and then I think we started taking indirect fire. And so I think
we went into a bunker immediately following that. Yeah.
So Shipman and I ran out to the top of a HESCO and jumped up on top. And I mean, yeah, look, just glad we were looking for anything to shoot at that point. To be frank, I think we were trying to find a reason to fire. We didn't see anything. So, and yeah, it went on from there. So,
I can imagine, kind of to my comment there about, good soldiers getting killed. How demoralizing must that be to the guys of that platoon? Put yourself in that situation. Say, hey, because they loved him right off the bat. He earned their respect. There was no, well, let's see what this guy knows type of conversation. He was in on it and taking care of those guys right off the bat. And, again, the conversation that him and I had later on, and the conversation whenever I asked about him, how's things going? Because I think we were still able to exchange some, whether it be Facebook or email, just like Bryson and I would, periodic update on things. But, how demoralizing must that be? And I do give the leadership, Colonel Kandahar, I suppose, plenty of credit, because they sent down a great platoon leader to replace Todd, Kinzel.
Yep.
And he was a really good dude from 1502. And I remember just kind of meeting him and having a conversation with him. And I guess I'm saying, but he filled in, and that platoon loved him too. So, do credit where credit is due for the leadership and recognizing that they still had to put, a quality person, to replace Todd, and plenty of credit to the rest of that platoon for rallying together and continuing on. But I've looked back, throughout the rest of my career and thought, that's interesting, because Kinzel was an RI. Remember that, Bryson?
I do. Yep.
Okay. And then I went to Fort Stewart, and Kinzel was in the same brigade as me at Fort Stewart. So there were times, anytime I came across him, he's actually the same battalion as me, that I thought, wouldn't that be interesting? Had that been Todd, or that role been filled, the whole time. So yeah, it sucked. But I do remember, the memorial ceremony kind of getting along on that.
I didn't know you guys both made it up for that. That's I don't know, it makes me happy to hear that.
Yes. So because for the memorial ceremony, the battalion knew that myself and Kyle wanted to go, and then, but yeah, the air was black. We're supposed to be dry, but then I think Sergeant Major White, if y'all remember him, Off Sergeant Major came in, came down and picked us up, and then drove us over there with like kind of two vehicle convoy, or small convoy nonetheless. But we were definitely not supposed to be driving at that time. But he knew how important it was to myself and Kyle to get there, and to see Jake, and to I guess get the band back together for a short period of time, so we can just console one another and then get back to doing what we needed to do.
This is a pretty special story. I mean, there were a lot of moments kind of in the Army I look back on that were good or bad, but Sergeant Major White making the effort to come down from Wilson, which means he's got to travel west, which does him no good on anything, to pick us up under whatever it is, Black Air or whatever, to drive us all the way up there. Then literally like we were, kids without a learner's permit, drove us all the way back past Wilson, all the way down to housing my dad, dropped us off, and then went back to Wilson. Never an ounce of, hey, you guys got to figure out how to get to Wilson, or I'll get you back to Wilson, then you can figure out how to get to housing my dad. And unannounced, just showed up one day, and somebody's like, Sergeant Major White's here and says you and Bryson have 15 minutes. And I remember Bryson and I were very upset that because of the air, we weren't going to be able to get up there. And so that story stands out, just taking care of folks when things really matter. It mattered a lot to us, for sure.
And I do give him a lot of credit, Sergeant Major White, for bringing these guys up, because that probably meant more to me than, looking back at it now, than I realized at the time. Because again, I've been there for a month. I didn't, one of our own got killed, but then you're by yourself again.
It sounds like an easy thing, just driving, especially when you look on the map, it's not that far away, all things considered, but people died on that road every day. So that shows just how was a serious trip, really important.
And you can't get those moments back, right? I mean, that's the one thing that it taught me in life. I've personally, unfortunately, been through a couple tragedies post that with my family and stuff like that. And I mean, those moments really matter, and they never come back around again. And it's something that you think about kind of forever. And so that stood out for me as well, just when things get to where they can go sometimes in life. It's incredibly hard, but just to pause and say, like, these are moments that we need to be a part of. We need to be there, and we need to take care of folks. It just, I don't know, we got to learn that in a very unfortunate way at a very young age, but that's some of the good things that can come out of a really shitty situation.
It might be a good spot to start to wrap up here, but before we do, go around. Anybody got anything else that you want to make sure we hit on, bring up, whatever it might be?
I got one from my perspective on. So looking back on Todd, there's a lot of things to be learned. One, an honor to know him and an honor to serve with him. Not only was he a great friend, he was a great father, he was a phenomenal husband. Hitting on one point that I mentioned earlier, the two things I learned from him was, or that I still utilize today while still serving, is always be ready. Again, you're one breath away from being that next man up and taking that position, and people are going to be relying upon you. The second thing is like taking care of the men and the women that you serve with. So Todd, for one thing that struck me when I first met him was that I remember walking into his office, and what he was doing, he was handwriting letters, and he was for basically every soldier that was in his platoon, and then he was handwriting letters to their families about who he is. So he knew, so the families knew exactly who was leading their sons and daughters into combat and training them for combat. And not saying that's something that you have to do as a leader within the military, but taking care of the families will go it's an easy thing to do, just to reach out and talk to the families, but it doesn't take much to show that you care for who you're serving with and who you're fighting with. So.
I love it. And then I'll let Jake close us out, or however we want to do it. But I think one other thing about Todd that we haven't spoken about that I feel is important for folks to know. I mean, Todd was a fairly religious individual. I mean, his faith was a big part of kind of who he was and what he stood for and how he thought about the world. And it was, I think, on one of these Advon lunches when we were in Afghanistan, and we were talking about the things that you talk about when you're deployed, like, what if I die, or what if I lose a limb? Like, these are for folks that haven't been deployed. I mean, these are real conversations we have, and they're kind of like, oh, it's Tuesday, let's talk about these things. And I remember talking about that, and Todd's response was kind of who Todd is. It makes you think, right? He's like, look, I'm going to get the words wrong somehow, but he was like, look, I don't want to die, but like, if it happened, like, I have a wife, I've brought life into this world, I've, served my country for several years. Like, if that's the path that, our Creator wants to take me on, like, I'm perfectly at peace with it. Now, like, I've heard some people say that, and you can kind of look at them and get a feel. I've never felt something was more true than when he said it to us that day, and obviously wish it wouldn't have happened. But again, that, to Jake's point earlier around, luck is not necessarily synonymous with being good or bad at anything. For an incredible soldier to go through an incredibly unlucky event, I think there's something to be said about where Todd was mentally at that time and his faith and how he felt about it. And it's just something that has always stuck with me as we think about the legacy that Todd has continued on after this and the impact that he's had on people.
Yeah, I think that Kyle and Bryson both kind of hit on some things that I absolutely would agree with. Todd and I think we conversed about things. That's why we got along so well. Is that shared understanding of, hey, if it happens, it happens. If we die, we know that our final resting place isn't here; it's in heaven. And so, his faith in Jesus absolutely was a reason why you're able to go on patrol at 10 o'clock, right? is the reason why you are able to buckle down and go back to training and doing the rest of your job the rest of the time, is because although it sucks losing your brother and a guy, again, when you kind of lay out the story that you're a platoon leader at the same time, you're XOs at the same time, you're both married, you're spending time on the weekends, you're playing football together, you know, you have these experiences, you both, you know, talk about Jesus, that when you wrap it all up, you know, there's a lot of similarities there, and you feel like, well, I could have been down there, he could have been where I'm at, and vice versa, and the roles are swapped. And so, but there was never a point in time where I sat there and said, well, you know, woe is me about the whole thing. We know where Todd went, and that is a peace that passes all understanding. But what it should tell all of us is, you know, don't waste the opportunity that you have. You know, he has witnessed to untold numbers of people. Anybody that hears his story or anybody that listens to this can sit there and say, geez, how can a guy leave all that behind and not be okay with it, but understand it, you know, and that's only through Jesus. And so don't waste your opportunity with your family, with your friends, with your kids, you know, whatever it may be, with your job, to impart a little bit of what interaction you may or may not have, you may have had with Todd throughout your life, you know, to improve somebody else's situation or day. So yeah, I appreciate you guys' stories, memories.
Yeah, thanks guys, all of you so much for doing this. I know it's not an easy topic, but you all kind of hit on legacy and impact, and it's clear that Todd made an impact on all of you. And as you talk about him and tell these stories, you never know who's going to listen, and it's going to change something in their life, right? You never know when that little sentence hits, just hits differently. And there's certainly people that'll hear this for the first time and they've never heard about Todd, and they're going to look him up, and it you just never know what that little life-changing moment could be. So thank you all very much again. Jacob, thank you. Kyle, Bryson, and we'll hopefully talk again here soon, guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.